Hello, this is Jim from the Encourage Network. Welcome. I believe you'll enjoy the lesson we have today. It's a really interesting one. So let's get into it. Imagine being told to leave behind everything familiar, your family, your friends, your job, and venture into a land you've never seen before. Now imagine the only guiding force is a promise for an unseen God. This was Abraham's reality. His story is more than a historical account. It's a tale of radical faith that still challenges and inspires us today. His unwavering belief wasn't just a passing sentiment, but a transformative force that defied logic and reason. Stay with me as we journey through Abraham's incredible life to uncover how his faith held the power to transform impossibility into reality. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 4, we witness the audacity of God's command to Abraham. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. He was called to leave behind not just his home, but a legacy, a culture, and a network of family and friends. It was his homeland, Ur of the Chaldeans, and it wasn't a backwater town, but a hustling hub of ancient civilization. It was a sophisticated society. It was a place of comfort. And his family, where Abraham's roots ran so deep. Now picture being told to leave that all behind with no coordinates, no travel itinerary, no end date, no schedule at all. He wasn't given a safety net, wasn't given a fallback plan. Instead, he had a promise. I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. Abraham was 75 years old, far beyond the age where people typically sought adventure or life change this great. He packed up his wife, Sarah, his nephew, Lot, and his belongings, setting off toward an unseen destination. It's worth saying the magnitude of this decision, how huge this was in a culture where leaving one's family was just unheard of. The family structure, it provided his economic stability, safety, and community identity. Stepping away meant surrendering all that for a divine calling. God transcended not just geography, but the logic itself. His journey was also symbolic of departure from the polytheistic culture of the Ur to the monotheistic faith in God, who promised blessings. By following God's call, Abraham laid the groundwork for a covenant that still reverberates through history, shaping the faith and identity of billions. This story raises a profound question for us today. Could we dare to step into the unknown like this, leaving behind everything that's comfortable, certain, and expected? Just for a promise by God-led journey? Abraham's story is a challenge to us to rise above comfort zones of predictability and trust in a God who calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. There was an impossible promise here. The next chapter in Abraham's journey leads him into a realm of miraculous, where God's promise to make him into a great nation seemed impossibly and out of reach. Abraham and Sarah was already advanced in years, and they had no children to call their own. In fact, Genesis 11:30 emphasizes that Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. By all earthly measures, the prospect of parenthood for the couple was out of reach. Yet God had different plans. In Genesis 15, the Lord reiterated his promise that Abraham's offspring would be as numerous as the stars. Abraham questioned this, of course, wondering aloud how it could be possible given his current childlessness. He pointed out that his servant Eliezer stood as the only potential heir, but God's answer was very firm. A son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. The night sky became a canvas on which God painted Abraham's future legacy, reassuring him that his descendants would be countless as the stars. But years went by and the promise remained unfulfilled. Sarah, filled with doubt and impatience, proposed a solution. She offered her maidservant Hagar to Abraham to bear a child on her behalf. This decision brought Ishmael into the world and would later lead to the family strife, but it wasn't the fulfillment of God's covenant's promise. despite their attempt to find a workaround. But God's word stood still. In Genesis 17, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, and meaning the father of many nations, and Sarai's name to Sarah. He declared that Sarah would bear a son, and his name would be Isaac, meaning he laughs. A poignant reminder of how Sarah laughed in disbelief at the prospect. But this was no joke. Genesis 21 tells us that when Abraham was 100 years old, Isaac was born to Sarah, who was herself 90. The joy and the amazement of that day must have echoed throughout their household as God's promise unfolded in a way that defied nature and logic. The birth of Isaac not only marked the beginning of the great nation God had promised, it also proved that no circumstance could be nullified by God's intentions. Abraham's faith, though at times riddled with uncertainty, stood as a beacon of trust that transcended human limitations. The impossible had become possible. So often we face situations that seem beyond hope, where logic and evidence work against us. But Abraham's story reminds us that when God speaks a promise over our lives, no obstacle is too great to overcome, and no delay is too long for fulfillment. Abraham and Sarah teach us that faith sometimes requires us to wait longer than we would like and believe in ways that stretch us beyond what we think is possible. Ultimately, God's promises will unfold in our lives if we remain steadfast and believe. After the miraculous birth of Isaac, Abraham experienced a period of joy and peace, relishing in the fulfillment of God's promise. But this tranquil season was destined to be shattered by one of the most challenging tests of his faith in history. In Genesis 22, 1 and 2, God commands Abraham to take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Well, the gravity of this request is beyond comprehension. Isaac was not only Abraham's beloved son, but also the living embodiment of God's promise to make Abraham into a great nation. How could God ask for the sacrifice of the very son he had miraculously provided? It seemed like a contradiction, yet Abraham's response was one of quiet obedience. He rose early the next morning, saddled his donkey, and set out with Isaac and 2 servants for the 3-day journey to Mount Moriah. As they neared the mountain, Abraham instructed his servants to stay behind while he and Isaac went ahead. We will worship and then we will come back to you. He assured them this statement is pivotal because it demonstrates Abraham's unwavering belief that both he and Isaac would return. He trusted that God could even raise Isaac from the dead if necessary. Hebrews 11:19. The father and son ascended the mountain, Isaac carrying the wood for the sacrifice while Abraham held the knife and fire. At some point, Isaac asked a heart-wrenching question, "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham replied with remarkable composure and faith, "God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." Upon reaching the designated spot, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood. He bound Isaac and laid him on the altar. Then with a heavy heart, yet unwavering obedience, Abraham reached for the knife, and at that moment, an angel of the Lord called out, "Do not lay a hand on that boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Then God provided a ram caught in a thicket to serve as a substitute sacrifice. This extraordinary event not only spared Isaac's life, but also highlighted God's provision and faithfulness. It reaffirmed that God's promises are never revoked and that he remains true to his word. This test wasn't designed to torment Abraham, but to refine his faith and reveal the depth of his trust in God. Abraham proved his readiness to surrender the most precious gift given to him, trusting that God had greater purpose This scene is also a foreshadowing of the ultimate sacrifice God would make when he sent his only son to be a substitute for the sins of humanity. The lesson here is one of radical faith and absolute surrender. It challenges us to consider what we are holding too tightly, what we fear to relinquish, or what we trust in more than God. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac demonstrates a faith that holds nothing back and believes that God can and will fulfill his promises, even if it requires the impossible. Abraham's obedience on Mount Moriah echoed through history like the striking of a bell, reverberating far beyond that single harrowing moment. His unwavering faith in God's promise laid the foundation for a legacy that remains unparalleled, a legacy that transcends generations and cultures, one that unites billions of people across the globe. In Hebrews 11, 8 through 12, the Apostle Paul captures the essence of Abraham's journey, describing how by faith Abraham, when called to go to the place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. From the moment he left Ur to the moment he stood ready to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham walked to the path marked by trust in God's character and unwavering belief in his promises. The journey was not without the stumbles or doubts. He fathered Ishmael with Hagar, lied about Sarah being his wife, and feared for his life more than once. Yet despite his imperfections, Abraham clung to his God's covenant with fierce determination. Even when the stars seemed too dim and the path ahead grew murky, his faith became the model for millions to follow, as he dared to believe in the invisible God who spoke promises that sounded impossible. He became known as the father of faith, not because he lived flawlessly, but because he walked in humility and dependence upon God. In Romans 4:3, Paul recalls Abraham believed God, and it was created to him as righteousness. It wasn't Abraham's works that set him apart. It was his unshakable conviction that God would fulfill every word he had spoken. But beyond the grand scale of nations and millennia, there is a personal, deeply emotional aspect to Abraham's story that resonates in the human heart. It's the tale of a man who loved his wife dearly and yearned to see her joy, and she held their child for the first time. A father who gazed into his son's eyes and felt his soul well up with gratitude for the gift of life. It's the story of a believer who dared to surrender everything, even the thing he had held most dear, with the faith that God would not fail. Abraham's journey challenges us to hold tightly to God's promises, even when they feel delayed, and to recognize that faith isn't just a single act, but a lifelong commitment to walk with God step by step. As we reflect on his life, may we be stirred to follow in his footsteps and trust that the one who called us into the journey will see it through to the fulfillment, building a legacy of faith through us that will continue to echo through generations. Abraham's legacy is not merely a historical tale of faith, but a vibrant, living example of what it means to trust God beyond logic and circumstance. His journey challenges us to let go of what's comfortable and predictable, to surrender our deepest desires, and to believe that God's promises are far greater than what we can envision for ourselves. Despite setbacks and uncertainties, Abraham walked with unwavering trust, leaving behind a path of faith that we can follow today. So how can we rise to that challenge? Let's take a moment to reflect on the promises you hold close, the dreams that feel too big, or the paths that seem too daunting. What is God calling you to step into with boldness and faith? Whether it's a new direction, a renewed purpose, or a deeper trust, embrace the call with courage, knowing that God is faithful to see it through. And as you continue your journey, I invite you to return to this channel, where we explore stories of encouragement and faith like Abraham's to inspire and strengthen your walk with God. Together, let's build a community where we uplift one another, find hope in God's promises, and boldly step into the unknown with unwavering faith. Thank you. God bless you.